how do we plan our teaching learning process. That is what is discussed in this particular course. So put together, the course is very, very important, and I'm hopeful that we will have a good interaction, and all of you will take interest in this particular course. Reason being that this is a course which has a lot of conceptual discussion, lot of discussions which builds the baseline for the study material for teaching learning, methodology, design, pedagogical design, and teaching learning process. So that way, I would just suggest that you take a little more care and interest while we discuss all these issues which are there in this particular course. But I'm sure you must have gone through the study material and you have had some idea as to what we are going to discuss. So the title of the course is Instructional Design. Today, what we will do, we will have a broad view of the course in all the blocks that we have in this particular course. And then we will come to block 1, which is the foundations of learning. So, as you have seen, this particular course has 5 blocks, and the block 1 is the foundations of learning. So the course outline, I think you will see the block 1 is foundations of learning. And in foundations of learning, we will come to know, in fact, I would say that this sets the base for the discussion of the remaining blocks 2, 3, 4, and 5. Very importantly, I think we have to see that what is learning, what is instruction. So if we clearly understand what is learning and what is instruction, I think we have half the job done. And then we have different schools of thought which deals with learning and instruction. So we will discuss those different schools. We have 3 schools, that is behavioristic school of thought, cognitivist school of thought, and constructivist school of thought. So this particular block deals with very important aspects of learning and instruction. Reason being that how do we behave? What are our information, knowledge gathering, sense? How we operate our senses to gather knowledge and to impart instruction. So that we will come to know in the behavioristic school of thought. If you go to the next cognitivist school of thought, then it has slightly different strategy. How do we look at the things? How do we construe knowledge, and so forth? And then we move to the constructivist school of thought. That means how do we construct knowledge? How do we make sense out of cognitions or cognitivistic approach or the behaviorist approach that is there. So if we continue with this, then we move to block 2 of the MDE 412, the course which is instructional design. So if the block 1 deals with learning and instructions, and then 3 strategies, 3 schools of thought for learning and instruction, the next block deals with instructional design. What is instructional design? So if we understand what is instruction, then we understand what is instructional design. So how instruction is set of events, set of stages that takes place or that helps in facilitate the process of teaching learning. So how do we design that? Aarti, good morning. So
Good morning, sir.
uh,
Am I audible?
yeah, yes. So we will deal with various theories, various models of instructional design, like component display theory, which is CDT, then elaboration theory, cognitive load theory, and cognitive flexibility theory, theory of multiple intelligence, and also the 4 CID, the 4 components of instructional design model. And similarly, if we go to block 3, which is instructional design process, I think we have the instructional design theories and model in block 2. How do we plan? How do we process the instructional design? So there are separate or the different processes. So we will discuss these in block 3, which is the ADDIE approach, that is analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. So that is ADDIE approach. Similarly, we have the learner's characteristics and learning styles. So another approach is uh, based on the learner's characteristics and learner's styles. How do we define the learner? What are the characteristics, and what are the various styles that the learner adopts in learning? So we will build the instructions according to the learning styles or the learner's characteristics, learner's traits. Of course, it has to be like that only, because if we build the instructional design which is not suiting, which is not based on the learner's traits, learner's peculiarities, then that will not go to the optimal. Then we will discuss designing learning. How do we design our learning and development of learning resources? What are the various resources that needs to be developed? And then evaluation of learning. This is very important point, because how do we evaluate? How do we assess the learner's learning as to what level the learner has achieved, and so forth. And then we have instructional design in practice. That is, we discussed yesterday, day 4 yesterday also, like we have the classroom situation. So this action research strategy is there. How do we look at the teaching learning process that is in happening in the classroom situation? So instructional design in classroom, how do we build the classroom the design for instruction? And similarly, you see, the classroom design has to be different from the training. In training, we put the instructional models for the teachers who are already well versed in the classroom design. So the training component has to be differently looked into while we decide or we design the instructional model. Similarly, if we look at the conventional, because we are talking about the classroom, we are talking about the training. So naturally, these are different situations from the distance education. So when we come to different education, I think we have to keep it in mind that we have a learner who is away, who is separated, as we discussed in the block 1, MDE 411, where we clearly understood that the distance education is where the learner is at a distance. Sorry, I was putting into the power cable. So that way, you see, we have to have a different design. So maybe it is going to be quite interesting. Reason being that we will come to know how do we teach in the classroom and what model, instructional model we adopt. How does that model work? What are the challenges? And similarly, we will come to the another aspect of open and distance learning. Perhaps you are aware that, and we also discussed in the course MDE 411, that one of the feature of the distance education, the intervention of the role of media. Greater role is played by media. So we use multimedia actually, in the distance education. So how do we design multimedia? I think if you are not looking it at very critically, then in simpler terms we can understand how do we design the multimedia. That means how do we plan to develop, say, for example, a lesson in digitized form, a lesson in the audio video format. So it's simply preparing audio video lesson where we have audio, we have video, we have text, we have slides, we have presentation, PPT is also part of that. So how do we design that? And instructional design in e-learning. So this is slightly different. If you go to studio and get a video recorded, then that is one thing. But if we plan it from one's own computers, one's own settings, then it has to be planned separately, differently. So that is planning or the instructional design in e-learning. So that will come to know. Very interestingly, we have profile portfolios. How do we, what is portfolio? That we will discuss in unit 21, which is block 5. And similarly, we will also learn design and development of portfolios. How do we develop the portfolios? So this is what we have in MDE 412, which is instructional design. And in the coming 4 or 5 days, or maybe 6 days, we will discuss all these things, that is instructional design. So as I was discussing with Preeti and other student, Arti, we discussed that why it is very important in distance education to give a serious thought to the instruction, because this is what we use for imparting the knowledge, the information, the guidance to the learner. So should we now go to block 1? Or any point you would like to make, any one of you?
I do take classes for training and development. I'm a faculty for training and development, and I can see ID model is here, and instruction design is part of training and development,
Yeah.
and this thing, all the cognitive behavior, all these are part of my subject.
So,
I think
so
yeah, that this block two comprises. Yes, sir.
you are going to be a standby
Yes,
faculty
sir.
for the session. You are a
Oh
standby
no, no, no.
session.
No, I can correlate such things with my subject as well, because this learning is there, instruction is there, and this cognitive development, constructivism,
Yeah.
so many things are there.
So very good. I think we are
Please
having a
continue.
privilege today of having one of our colleagues, student, learner with the background, and I'm sure we will have interventions at the right point, and maybe certain things which are not there, they will also be incorporated from the experience. So welcome to this session, and it is very good that you have a background in training and faculty development program. So that's advantage. So first of all, I think the first block is what is the foundations of learning. So I think we discussed the theories part in the MDE 411. So there also we discussed the foundations of open and distance learning, or the foundations of theories that pertains to open and distance learning. So similarly, we come to this particular block, which is foundations of learning. So we have been talking about the what is foundation, what are the, why do we have theories, why do we have foundations? Because in this open distance education, I think if we remember, it was very frequently remarked that there are no theories, there are no foundations. But even then, we discussed a lot of like Von Homburg, Michael Moore, Otto Peters, and so forth. We discussed a number of scholars, number of distance education practitioners who made very significant contribution in giving sort of small concepts, and these were very helpful to build the distance education as it is in the present times. So same here, we come to the foundations of learning. What are the bases of learning? What are how do we learn primarily, and what are the concepts? What are the framework within which we learn? So the unit one is quite interesting, and I think it is learning and instruction. So if we look at this particular unit, then we understand that the learning and instruction are two variables here, and these two, what happens in the entire learning process? One, we instruct, we provide instructions, and secondly, we learn. So everything involves or revolves around learning and instruction. So if we are able to understand what is learning, what is instruction, then I think we can relate it to the behavioristic school of thought or behavioristic approach or cognitivistic approach or the constructivistic approach. I think if you look at the technicalities or the inner nature of these three technical terms, it sounds little bit complex, but it is not so. When we come to discussion, it becomes quite easy, quite relating to what we think, how do we operate. So if we have little bit of training, little bit of instructional or instruction providing background, then you can very easily relate it. So I think the very first question is, what is learning? There are a lot of concepts about learning. What is learning? What is how do we define learning? So I think learning is something which changes our attitude, which changes our perspectives. In fact, that is what is learning. So everybody has a perspective. Everybody has a prior learning. So if there is new learning, then what happens? We change our perspective. So learning is primarily, dealing with the changing of perspectives. So if we say in simpler words, learning is what makes a permanent change in our perspective, in our approach, in our point of view, in our attitude, in our sensing the things, or in our cognitivistic approach about the world and taking a world view. So learning is what that makes a permanent change in our perspective. This is what is learning. We can relate it to learning because if we learn something which we didn't do previously, then it makes a change. It brings new perspective to our uh, to our sense, to sensing things, to our approach towards a certain activity, to a certain piece of knowledge, to a certain issue about which we have a different understanding. So if we look at the knowledge which we have previously, then that is of one set or one particular shape. But if we take more views from the world, we move around, we gather more information, and if that changes our perspective, changes our approach, changes our way of evaluating things, so it is said that learning is what makes a permanent change in our attitude towards the things, towards a piece of information, towards an issue. Uh, that is one thing. But primarily, what is learning? Learning is a behavioristic activity. What is behavior? I think this is a question. So we will discuss it more elaborately in the unit 2, what is behavior or what is behavioristic approach. But I think in a layman's view, we know what is behavior. Behavior is basically a response. It's a response of an individual towards something that happens, something that takes place in our vicinity, in our surroundings, in one's classroom, in one's discussion. So that is what is behavior. So behavior is basically a response, or rather, as it is defined in Unit 2, it's a stimulus. It's a stimulus response. So the way we respond to something, some happening, some activity, some disturbance, some good news, some information, piece of information that is given to us, the way we respond is the behavior, because that shows, that describes our character, that describes our attitude, that describes our approach towards something that happens, that takes place. So, as Mayor had said, that the learning uh, is a lifelong process, and it is catalyst in bringing about a permanent change in our behavior. So the way we react is behavior, or the way we provide the stimulus or response, that is behavior. And when there is a permanent change in our behavior, that is learning. Learning is not something which doesn't continue to be part of our behavior. That is not learning. That is just receiving or the reception. But once what we receive, if it becomes part of our attitude or approach for all time in future, then that is called the learning. So I think if you can relate it, because you might have seen that in a classroom situation, we learned a lot of things, and what we learned in class 1, class 2, 3, 4, 5, in primary, in middle, in high school, in our college education, in our workplace, uh, most of it becomes part of our persona, our personality. That means personality is what? Personality is defined by one's behavior. So, what is behavior? Behavior is what is our response to a situation. So, what is our response to a situation when that response giving approach changes permanently? If we were When we were in college, then we used to react differently. But then we learned how to react, how to behave in a classroom situation. We were taught by teachers, we read the books, we read literature, and so forth. Then eventually we formed a habit how to react to parents' guidance, to parents how to behave in a social situation, how to behave in classroom, how to behave in a workplace situation. So that is what is the learning. So learning is not necessarily an information that deals with mathematics, that deals with the knowledge, or that deals with something else. So it is not only up to that. That is because in simpler terms, in normal terms, we call knowledge, we call learning, that we receive in a particular situation for for our information with regard to mathematics, with regard to science, humanities, social science, and so forth. But learning actually is far more uh, subtle and far more deeper, because in our life situations, how do we react at a particular period of time, and then if we have a little bit refreshing or more information on that, on our behavior, and if we are able to change our behavior, and that a change will become part of our behavior in future, because it will always be reflected. So I think it is important that we that what is learning, what is behavior, we will discuss. But because learning is that which brings permanent change in one's behavior, so that is learning. Learning is when it has permanently made a change or brought a change. It is not learning if we for a moment change ourselves and eventually we retain the older habit, then it is not a learning in a real terms. So learning is basically change in behavior. Uh, so we will come to the discussion a bit more elaborately. But the change happens. The change happens in certain circumstances. What are those circumstances? Those are called the conditions of learning. So, what are the conditions of learning? What are the various different conditions in which we learn? So, we learn. How do we learn? We learn by practice. We learn by reinforcement. We learn by feedback. We learn by generalization. We learn by discrimination. I have been always, discussing or insisting that what is the ultimate goal of education. I mean, let us forget about learning for a moment. What does education do in our lives? It not essentially teaches 2 plus 2 is equals to 4. You see, if we go to local market and the Rehdi Bazaar or the small rural, art bazaar, we find rural ladies coming and selling their small products. Small children are there. What are they doing? They are selling their product. You buy this, that, and you buy 10 things, 250 grams, 500 grams, 1 kg. And before you gather all those things, then the boy or the lady who may seemingly not very well educated, maybe some level of education is with her, but she is more quick than the computer sometimes to calculate. How did she do it? So this is the innate quality of human being. But what we learn by education, or perhaps by learning what we learn to discriminate, because then we use the power of judgment. So if we have that approach, that is called the discrimination. So we discriminate between, it is not a very derogatory term, because normally we understand discrimination in a negative sense, in a derogatory sense. So it is not so. It is very important from the behavioristic point of view that we learn to discriminate between the things. So we learn to discriminate between certain variables, parameters, or maybe two poles, and then we decide which one is more in my interest, or beneficial to me or not beneficial to me. So these 4 5 conditions are there with which we learn what we do. When we discriminate, when we or generalize, we say when the clouds formed in the sky, it generally rains. It generally rains. So that is one basis of conditions in we learn. So we learn that if there are clouds, because it is happening quite often, and quite most of the times it is raining. So that is generalization. But and also we do discriminate, because we take two different routes to reach one place from one point, and if we say that a particular route takes lesser time, then we say no, this is more economical. because we discriminate. Maybe one route is longer, so it takes 5 hours to travel a certain distance. But if we take another route and if it takes 4 hours, then we say, no, this is better. So that is what our approach is towards, or that is what the one condition of learning, that by generalization and by discrimination. We will come a very interesting point here, that is the reinforcement, or we will study the B.F. Skinner's model, which is the which discusses the reinforcement model. What is the reinforcement? So when we, put extra emphasis on something, we reinforce it. But how do we reinforce it? So operant conditions are there. We will read that model, Skinner's model. It is a operant conditioning model. Uh, so that is one condition of learning. Then there is a feedback. If we tell our student, tell our person whom we are trying to, put information across, then if you say, no, you are learning very quickly, you are doing it very good, or sort of feedback that if you give, then that also makes learning so a perfect condition for learning. If we all the time we say to a learner that no, you are not doing anything, so even if the learner is doing something, we discourage it all the time, then there won't be any learning. So that means there has to be a condition, there has to be feedback, proper good and bad. Of course, you have to point it out whether someone is learning, the learning is satisfactory, learning is not satisfactory, learning has some things to modify. So that is one condition. Then practice. There's a common saying that practice makes a man perfect. So if you do things more than one time, keep on doing it. That is one condition for learning. Then cognitivity, contiguity. What is contiguity? That is means this condition is almost, when you have a stimulus and a response, then you basically simultaneously you are contiguous. Your contiguity is there. Uh, you are trying to learn from that situation. You are trying to make sense from that situation. What happens if somebody is knocking you? Then you are always thinking that yes, someone is hitting me, someone, and then you try to escape. So it's a situation where the things are happening, and you are making a decision. So these are few conditions of learning, and if we will discuss these more in more details in the subsequent discussions. So if we say that what is your approach of learning? Sometimes what happens if someone is you might have seen, the friends. There are friends. If someone is tapping one's shoulder time and again, then somebody might react very differently. But most of the time, if we are friends, we don't react. We don't react. You see, one might continuously keeping tapping on the shoulder. We will not react. But sometimes we react very, unexpectedly. Someone might become feel offended with it, and he may further react back. So this is a situation where we react differently. In some situation, our reaction is quite different. So what happens in some situation? What the the things are happening, but a person is making different sense out of it. Person is taking it differently. Person is taking not the superficial happening, but one is taking the deeper sense out of it. So that is the deep approach. The conditions which are there for the learning then their learning happens in with two different approaches. That is the deep approach or the superficial approach. Superficial approach is what happens. I study a piece of information, and within that piece of information, I say, no, 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 there is nothing on it. You see, there is nothing. It is just trash. So that means I have cursorily taken it and I have outrightly rejected it. But perhaps if someone else read it and he has more engrossed reading, and maybe somebody say, no, no, there is something which is which is between the lines or between the letters. That is what is the between the lines. When we say I am reading between the lines, can you explain what is reading between the lines? Would anyone of you would like to say? So if I say I am reading between the lines, that means I am looking for a deeper meaning, something which is not there, right? But at the same time, if I say no, no, there is nothing, it and simply I reject something outrightly, that is the surface approach. So this is what happens with the learning also. So if we try to learn with more engrossed approach, more something which is not there through the available through the words, but I am trying to make sense. We use the word make sense. So what is making sense? Making sense is reading between the lines. So the reading between the lines is slightly different. I am trying to understand. It may sound difficult initially, but then ultimately, if I ponder, if I give more attention to it, so there are two types of approaches to learning. One is the deep learning, and the other one is the surface learning. So as I said, sometimes we see things and uh, we outrightly reject, or we simply say, no, no, it's not very complex, it is very simple, and I would just remember it. That is fine. But if you are trying to look into the deeper sense, deeper side of the text that you have, I think we discussed what is discourse. हिंदी में इसको हम कहते हैं प्रोक्ति विमर्श. So if we look at the propti or the discourse, then we can relate it to the learning process. Propti is definitely an example of the deep learning because it is reading between the lines. So similarly, we have a different approach, that is the surface approach. And what is surface approach? That is to take the meaning that is construed through the reading, first reading of the text. So let us come to classroom situation. So in the classroom situation or in teaching learning process, whether it is in the conventional mode or in the open and distance learning, we always we adopt either of the approach. Sometimes you see you are discussing something and you ask whether the class has understood it, and then someone's who is some student, some boy or girl who are little tricky, they will immediately say yes, yes ma'am, yes ma'am, I do it. So they will raise their hand, and then if you ask them, they will give you an answer which will be little sort of incomplete. Rather, I shouldn't be using word like laughable or something, or but sometimes it is very cursory. So but then you say no, yes, it is fine, but you understood, but the actual meaning of this is that. So what is referred to by the actual meaning, that is the deep approach towards some piece of information, some piece of knowledge. So that is what the deep knowledge and the surface knowledge, or the deep learning or surface learning. So if we move little ahead, we come to the point as the structure goes of the unit, then it is to discuss the difference between surface and deeper approach. We will and the perspectives of learning. So, if you look at the perspectives of learning, as we discussed, the conditions of learning, approaches to learning. Similarly, there are perspectives of learning. So, perspectives of learning are these are individual as well as the common. So, if you look at the perspectives, that means what conditions are there, how do we react to a particular conditions, what is our response. We use the word SR, that is the word we
So,
use.
so I have one question. Excuse me, sir.
Yeah,
I have one question. Hello, am I audible, sir?
yeah. Are you're getting my voice?
Yeah, yeah. So here, yeah, yeah. So here it is written: learners are very pragmatic about their studies due to flexibility is there. So don't you think, apart from distant learners who are जो conventional learners हैं, aren't they pragmatic?
I think I gave a small
And
example.
here it is written very pragmatic,
No.
very pragmatic.
I get your point. What you say? I gave you a small example of a boy or girl who are studying in class, and the teacher asks a question, and what happens? Similar, immediately the hand is raised, right?
Mm.
You are getting my point.
Yes,
So,
sir.
so
Yes, sir.
there is a catch. If they are very pragmatic, then what the learner will do? Learner will not react immediately.
Definitely, they will be taking interest, high level of interest
Yes,
in.
full interest. They will try to look at the meaning of piece of information from to be verified from various point of views. And very important point to raise is
Definitely, he'll be doing his work.
they will be relating it to their prior knowledge, distance learner, and then verifying it on the basis of their
Mm.
prior knowledge, and also they will see it from the experiential learner, what they have worldview, what is worldview about certain things. Because if we look at the constructing a meaning, then the more matured meaning which is constructed is that of which conforms to the worldview. That is what is actually happening. Actually, the practice of the practice of the environment or maybe of people. So the response of a distance learner will definitely be more restrained, more mature, and more deeper. So that is how the word has been used, very pragmatic.
Pragmatic.
It will
Okay,
not
sir.
stimulus response. It will be stimulus.
Definitely, because they do have ample time to work on that and can correlate with the experience they had with that.
They might take ample time. They do take more time, but the necessary point is that they will come up with the answer which is more which has more probability of acceptance in the world, in the environment, in the conditions,
Yes, sir.
right? So, uh, so basically, if we talk about the perspective of learning, Then you see there are a lot of conditions that affect the learning. There are different circumstances, there are different situations which affect the learning. So if we look at the two, three principles of learning, then the very first one is the behavioristic perspective. What is behavioristic perspective? This is the perspective that emphasis on the just a moment. Behavioristic perspective is you might have seen that when there are permanent changes in the learner's behavior in the classroom situation, you might have seen that you have a pupil coming straight away from the home to the class. So initially we orient the student to sit, to try to listen, try to be within some sort of discipline, and eventually, gradually, we build that kind of sense in the child, and the child gradually, adapts into this situation. And at certain point of time, the child eventually, accepts that yes, this is my place. I should come here. I should sit. I should, if I need to ask something, then I should ask for permission, raise my hand and ask for permission. So this very perspective of learning, which makes a permanent dent, what we call permanent effect, or rather we can say when it is a holistic change in one's attitude, in one's behavior, in one's response to a certain situation. So then it is a behavioristic approach or behavioristic perspective. Means your overall in your persona, in your personality, there is a holistic change. So that is what is the behavioristic perspective. Now similarly we have second way of learning, or the second impact that we have on our learning, that is the cognitive perspective. You see, sometimes when we get into new system, uh, then we are not tuned to gain knowledge from certain situation. We do not look upon the things and gather information. So our cognition of the thing is different. Cognition is basically a very subtle term. हिंदी में इसको हम कहेंगे तो बहुत संवेदनशील ये एक एक्सप्रेशन है, अभिव्यक्ति है। और इसको अगर हम बहुत ही ग्रॉस टर्म में समझने की कोशिश करें तो शायद संभव नहीं होगा. सो वी हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड what is cognition. Cognition is to get sensitive to certain things, to certain set of events, certain set of instructions, happenings. When we become sensitive to it, sensitive to it, we try to learn not only by always by scolding of the teacher, but we learn by the gesture and postures of the teacher. Whether teacher is slightly in good mood in class, if the class has done its homework very properly and adequately, and as the teacher's wishes, then the smile, the sort of expression on the teacher's face would be different. And the learner will understand that if I do my homework properly, teacher feels happy. There is no transaction. Teacher has not scolded. Nothing has happened. But the children or the children learn by way of expression of the teacher, by way the teacher behaves in a class. So this sensitivity which comes into the child is basically sensed. So it is a cognition. It's a cognition. So this cognitivism is very important. When we learn not by clear instruction, not by explicit instruction, but by implicit effect that is created by the common behavior of the teacher and learner, and thereby a more congenial situation that occurs when we learn from that situation. That is the cognitive perspective or cognitivism from which we learn, not by the direct set of instruction, but by the effect that is created by the set of instructions. So this is another perspective of learning. So there are a lot of people, especially John Piaget's theories, we will learn. John Piaget's theory we learn in the coming pages. So there, the cognitive learning makes much more sense actually if we look at the overall process of teaching learning, because a lot of things. I will give you an example. It is generally said that like the management education is much more refinedly learned in the face-to-face mode. We find it little difficult to learn the management courses properly in the distance mode. Why it is so? Because when there is a group discussion, when there is a interaction between the peer group or the discussion with the teacher, then we learn a lot more from the group discussions. May not be the information part only, but how to behave in a group, how to react to a situation, that we learn in the group. So there are certain types of learnings which are more effective in situations where we have the cognitive perspectives for the learning. So then there's another perspective in learning, which is the constructivism learning. What is constructivism learning? From a certain situation, we try to construct knowledge ourselves. When it is raining, nobody says you should not go out. When it is sliding, no one will say that you should not cross this particular patch of land at that particular moment. Because we have seen, then we try to construct our own piece of information. So this piece of knowledge that we learn, and then we devise a strategy that how to cross this particular patchy portion of the land where it is raining and it is sliding. What we do? We take either a big stick to get the support of that stick so that we may pass that particular patch without getting washed away. Similarly, in certain different situations, we have a situation which have to be dealt with the strategy. Then the strategy has to be developed or created there and then. So when we do that in certain situations, that is the constructivism perspective. So we construct our piece of knowledge that is developed or devised from the strategies that we formed or we decided at a particular point of time, or in a situation which has suddenly gets created, or in a situation which is suddenly abruptly unfolding in our fore. So that is the constructivism perspective. Social constructivism perspective. This is one perspective. What is social constructivism perspective? It is something that we build gradually. In society, we are exposed, we meet people, we learn from people's behavior, and then eventually we reach a certain level where we feel, yes, fine, now we have come this way, we don't need this knowledge anymore, but we would like to build our further knowledge on that basis. So it is also called the scaffolding model. Scaffolding, I think when if you go to a certain construction site, there are a lot of scaffolds which are raised to reach a particular level. So similarly, in society, we learn from social combinations, and then eventually we form our basis, and from that basis we transfer our previous knowledge into the future course of action that is there, which is, I think, if we call it a higher learning or higher piece of information knowledge, which we would like to reach. So we take advantage of the social or the step by step phased kind of interaction or piece of information, and then we reach a certain level, and from that we build another set of progress. So it is a scaffolding model also, social constructivism approach. Now we have the connectivistic approach. So I think we have read about George Siemens, a very important educationist. So he has given this model particularly for the digital era. So what is connectivistic approach? Or the connectivist approach is the approach which comes, or a point of view of learning which develops from the interaction, from the meeting, from mutual sharing of information between different people. So maybe some people are within a certain piece of information that they have. Certain people might not be in that particular group, those who had a particular piece of information. So both will interact and ultimately they will get connected, and then they will come to a different set of understanding. So this is what the connective perspective. So these are basically few approaches, few perspectives. So if you look at all these different perspectives, I think it is not difficult for us to relate them to the world of knowledge, world of learning. And if we have small background in the teaching learning activities, processes, then we can relate them quite easily. Now this is a small instruction uh, which is about the instruction. What is instruction? Learning is that which makes a permanent change in one's behavior. Behavior is a stimulus response. How do we react towards some information, some knowledge, some happening, or any other event that takes place in our surrounding? But what is instruction? This is quite interesting. Instruction is, I think, Aarti, would you like to explain what is instruction?
It is directing people what has to be done.
Yeah, this is a yes, directing people what should be done. That is, but that is fine. That is there. Basically, instruction is saying, uh, uh, it's a sequence of certain acts or activities or events. You know, so I think it would be better if we take the word direction, because if we
Yes.
the word direction, then people might not be receptive to the idea. So it is a set of a set of events. What is set of events? It is not direction. is not meant to be followed in totality. Instruction is uh, sort of shown, and the receptor takes as as it suits to one, as it may be required by, not necessarily that one should follow it. So, uh,
Definitely.
so it's a set of events in the classroom situation. How teacher instructs, what teacher does, teacher presents the situation, says, okay, A has to go to a market and buy 5 apples. The rate of apple is so and so, and there is another quality of apple. The rate is so and so. You have a patient at home who requires better quality apples, so you buy it and bring home. So he leaves a certain set of events. From those events, the child decides what are my needs, what should I buy, how much money do I have, and so forth. So this is set of events. So he or she would leave a kind of sequences there, and if one has an independence, one has a freedom to choose and decide as to which one is to be bought, which one is to be not bought. That depends upon the buyer's capacity, buyer's needs and circumstances. So this is the set of events by which we, take some decision. So this is instruction. So we take decision on the basis of our own demand, our own capacity. So, but there is there is a model before us, and from that model we learn as to what should be done, what decision is in our interest, or whether it is not in our interest. So there are certain principles. So these there are very simple principles. They can be very easily related to, that is the task related or problem central. So what happens? Sometimes we have the task related concepts or the problem uh, centered. If we have to do something, then we look for the instructions uh, that deals with a real life situation. So real life situation, that means if someone says that walking on the middle of the road is dangerous, right? Because it can entail into fatal happenings. So we know, then nobody needs to tell us that yes, we can meet the accident if we walk in the middle of the road. So what should we doing there? We should be avoiding the road. So ultimately, what we do? We avoid walking in the middle of the road. We try to walk on the pathways, side pathways, or the side section of the road. So this is the task related or the problem uh, centered. Problem centered means if there is an issue, we are not able to sort out something, then we look at a situation where certain parameters, certain models are there. From those models we learn, and then we try to solve that particular problem. Now, this learning is promoted when learners activate in the relevant program of knowledge. So what we do, we participate in certain activity, which teaches us as to what should we be doing, how we should be making proper sense out of it. So this is a learning comes with a demonstration. Demonstration is an act where something is shown happening, and uh, it is entailing into a set of events. That means if there is a say for example in a operation theater, operation is happening, some surgery is happening. So what happens? There are certain, there is a group of doctors, there is a group of other paramedics. All of them are, what they are doing, they are looking at it, and then they get higher knowledge from it as to how to deal with the situation. Next time, what will happen? They will be doing it independently. Then same is with their activation is there, and their participation is there, and they learn by demonstration. Then application, sometimes we get to know some things, and then we apply it. What we acquired, we apply that knowledge, and then we get properly implemented. We implement it, and then we feel we have got more skill, more in a way piece of information that we can apply in our real life situation. Say for example, the driving, we sit with the person who we see driving, and afterwards we all learn, we know how to change the gears. So next time the driver, the demonstrator will be sitting on the other side, and the driver side, the person who is sitting, he will drive, but he will be required definitely to go to a session previously, whereby there is a trained demonstrator to tell what is to be done. And integration is what happens. We integrate new skills into our day-to-day life. We know how to put, a small child learns gradually how to use the fork, how to use the spoon, how to use the knife. So all these things are there. So these are the principle of learning. I mean, what do we mean by principles of learning? We integrate, we apply, we learn by demonstration, we learn by activation, and we learn by solving the problems. So if we solve the task, if we solve the problem, then we learn from that. So then we see we have another issue to discuss today, which is very important, because otherwise we will not be able to complete it. So we'll come um, to the behavioristic situation. We discussed what is stimulus response, what gets into in our approach when we learn. So there is a permanent change in our behavior. What is this behavior? This is the question. So as I said previously, behavior is something which is a stimulus response. Behavior is what is our stimulus, what is our response. So, what is our response to a situation that describes our behavior? And what is our behavior? Behavior is a uh, sort of reaction, sort of response to a situation, to a happening. And this happening, this response is expressed uh, either without reinforcement or with the reinforcement. So we use the terms SR, or SR with which is a reinforcement, and SR, stimulus response without reinforcement. So our behavior, our learning, our change in our behavior, when it is without reinforcement, that means uh, without any sort of something that we get tempted to. Sometimes we get tempted to certain situation, and then we change our behavior. But sometimes we do change our behavior, or a change occurs in our behavior without response. So a very important theory is uh, which is there, B.F. Skinner's theory, which is the theory whereby one changes brings changes into one's behavior just because there are certain reinforcements. So this theory will be very important, and I think the theory is called the operant conditioning, because there are certain conditions which we discussed. There are certain conditions of the learning, and within the conditions we have to uh, certain temptations. So what are these temptations? Like cognitivity, we would like to be more sensitive to certain situation. We do a lot of practice, we do reinforcement, and then there's a feedback, there's generalization, discrimination. So if you go into detail of all those things, then we know that a very important theories by B.F. Skinner. There are certain other theories also, like Pavlov's classical condition, Watson's learning theory. But one theory which is accepted in the teaching learning process more often, more widely, that is the Skinner, B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning, or Gagne's learning theory. Then we have social learning theory, the application of behaviorism in the instructional design. This is the end point of the discussion of behavioristic school of thought. So primarily, if we look at the behavioristic school of thought, it discusses how our behavior changes, whether our behavior or whether the changes in our behavior are without any reinforcement. Reinforcement here refers to some some temptation which we had and that gets fulfilled. So that is basically there, that something we get after bringing change in our behavior. So very classical example is there that is used by Skinners to show that how the reinforcement work in bringing about changes in behavior. So we will first go to the, as we understand that there are two types of learnings which are through the stimulus responses, stimulus response with feedback or with reinforcement, or stimulus response. Sometimes we get to change our behavior without any reinforcement, but sometimes we expect something. If I do my good work in the if I do very good homework, or if I do good work in the class, I want a word of appreciation by the teacher. So then I change my behavior. But at times, what happens? I do not want any piece of appreciation. I just want to do it for myself. What happens to the distance learning? That is very important. Distance learner, we were talking about the distance learning where assignment part is there. Why assignment part is there? What is assignment is doing? Assignment is working to promote, to give reinforcement to the learner. So this applies to the open distance learning perhaps more deeply than others. In classroom situation also this works very well. Students get very prompted to learn, prompted to do more work if if their work is appreciated. So the teacher always put some remarks on their notebooks, very good, or rather good grade, or rather say well done. Why teacher does that? That is done because the student will be prompted and promoted to do more, perhaps much better in the next time. The teacher knows that it is not very good, yet the teacher says, yes, you have done very well, and for next time you will do much better. So that kind of, so we talk about the tutor's comments. We have been talking about the feedback from the tutor to the student. in the distance education, in the evaluation of assignments, the teacher gives the tutor comments. So we talk about two types of teachers' comments, positive and negative. So we have positive comments, we have negative comments, or the null comments sometimes. The teacher writes says, well done. What is well done? There is no linkage to that. So if teacher says, you have attempted question number 5 very nicely, and you have given the information from your own experience from the other reference books also, so it is appreciated. So then the learner knows where I have worked sincerely, the teacher knows it, and the appreciation works better. But sometimes there are vague comments. Mm, Teacher writes one word, irrelevant. What is irrelevant? Whether the whole attempt is irrelevant or just one small para is irrelevant. So in distance education, the teacher, while writing the comments, should write the tutor type comments. We call it tutor type comments. That means there should be positivity in the comments so that the learner at his or her own place able to find out which portion is properly attempted, which has more scope for information, and whether I have done the work properly or not. So it is to be pointed out very clearly, very efficiently, and also it should be such that it makes the learner capable of finding out as to where his or her work is satisfactory, where his or her work is not satisfactory. So this relates to this particular Skinner and operant conditioning model, or a stimulus response, which is with reinforcement. But sometimes in distance learning also, perhaps the learner is little evolved, so he or she might not require a real, I mean, whether they may not care for the appreciation, whether the appreciating words are there or not. They will continue their work. They are already thorough in their approach. So that is how the conditioning works. What is the purpose of the learning conditions? Because they help to learn more objectively, more positively. They help to bring about desired results if the conditions are congenial, if the conditions are favorable. So these are there. So we'll go to small. We'll discuss the Watson's learning. What is the Watson's learning? So Pavlov's classic learning condition is also there. But we will first discuss uh, Skinner's, then we will come to the remaining theories, because that is one which we have been applying more often. So Skinner is known is a known psychologist who has actually furthered the theories which were propounded by Thorndike and others. So what he found that sometimes if there is a little reinforcement, then we are perhaps more prompted to do a certain act. That means if we have to study, if the distance learner has to study at his or her own place, then the distance learner can be encouraged to learn more often if they are given little appreciation. So he uses an example of a small rat who is put into the box. So it is just like a distance learner. Initially, when a distance learner gets into distance learning, he finds or she finds a very different situation within which one has to learn. And initially, they are not able to make any headway. Sometimes they get blocked into that hole. So what should be done? So Skinner gives an example of a hungry rat, which is first place in the box. So what happens? The rat tries to break here and there and knocks at the different places, but doesn't make any sort of uh, progress, and eventually, he resigns to the situation. But suddenly, the rat hits a small or taps a small gate which opens, and then there is something to eat. So there is something to eat, and then the rat understands that there is some food, there is some reward. If I hit this particular tap at a particular point, then the lever opens, and then there is a piece of grain there. So the next time the rat learns, maybe two, three efforts, and then again that opens, and then the rat gets another piece of grain. Similarly, gradually the rat knows that just by tapping this particular lever, there will be grain. So it is same with the distance learning. The distance learner gradually understands that if I do good work, then I will be appreciated by the teacher, and with that, he or she gets really encouraged to learn. So this is a situation. This happens. It is a operant conditioning. Operant conditioning means that the the rat learns in a happening conditioning, the conditions which are the in operation. So within the operational conditions, one learns to make progress. So this same is with the distance learner. Distance learner is also at the in the stage of learning, is in the conditions of learning, but within those conditions which are or which may not seemingly be very favorable in the beginning, but eventually when one knows where to knock, how to knock. So if a distance learner knows that the approaching the teacher is a good option, and then by approaching the teacher, the tutor, I will get this particular piece of information, and if I do this my work with the help of this particular piece of information, I will get good grade. So that means, or I will get appreciation, or I will get good guidance. So that means the distance learner will be encouraged to learn. Similarly, just as this case is discussed, in whereby a rat in a very isolated conditions learn by tapping a particular lever, there is possibility of grain. Then the tapping will be little more frequent, then more frequent, then more frequent. Ultimately, nothing will be done except tapping the lever, and then there will be piece of grain. So same thing with the distance learning. So it is a operant conditioning. So the conditions under which there are some operation is going on, and within this operant conditions, there is a reinforcement, and within because of that reinforcement, there is an achievement, there is a gain of information, there is a result, maybe in terms of appreciation, that will help the learner to learn. Yes.
So there is Pavlov theory of conditioning, right? In which
Oh,
a bell and a dog was there. So it is
yeah,
also a conditioning theory. So what is the difference between those? Pavlov theory is there.
yeah. No, actually, you see, the Skinner's is a operant conditioning
Because
theory. Yeah.
in that also operation is goes on. If some food is ready,
Yes.
then the saliva is there automatically deleted into the mouth of the dog
Yeah.
after ringing the bell.
Uh,
So it is also a sort of conditioning theory. What is the difference between both?
Pavlov's, no, the dog's theory. where the dog is an the okay. No, I will just come to a point. It develops also. Just give me. You see, there are two things. It is the Pavlov's is natural response to a neutral stimuli. Natural response. Do you understand?
Neutral.
Uh, the natural response is only when they use the saliva. So the dog is automatically attuned to the taste, to the smell. So he would like to respond to that. But in the case of a rat, it is not the case. In the case of the rat, the condition is different. It is operant condition. This is a natural. Classical conditioning is a natural conditioning. That means the dog will be automatically attracted to something which is his or her own innate habit. You know, the innate habit, which is the very basic habit of any animal. So he or she will be attracted to that innate habit. He or she will do that. But in a rat's case, it is totally operant conditioning, means the rat was hitting here and there without any, because of out of frustration. So the frustration part is there, which is the operant condition. So he is operating in a different conditions which are uh, happening there. So within those happening, there is a sudden result, right? So, but what will be the condition with the hungry dog? Hungry dog is actually responding to an innate sort of habit which is there in the classically within the animal, and more so with the dogs, because the dogs will be attracted to the natural stimuli. But natural stimuli is the saliva, which is the taste which is already within the nature, within the body of the animal or body of a person or whatever it is, to which he or she will be attracted. And if one is attracted to that, then the effort will be made on the basis of natural stimuli. But it will be different from the operant conditioning, because in operant conditioning there is no previous connection between the rat's habit and what is operating. So within the operating, something happens without any previous connection to that. But a dog will having a natural stimuli, that means that comes from the saliva. So this is the different, the response is different in two situations. One is on the natural stimuli, the other one on the apparent conditions. So you have to distinguish between the two conditions. If, say, for example, I will say, mm, say, for example, children, you know, if there is a chocolate or there is a something which is natural stimuli to the child, the response will be different. He will be more tempted to do things to his or her taste, because there is a particular commodity which is previously related to the natural taste or the stimulating taste of the protagonist. But if it is not there at all, and you make effort in isolation, in the conditioning whereby you are bound, then if some reward comes, that is the conditioning reward, or the rewards which comes in the conditioning which are happening. So there I think the basic difference is the natural stimuli that comes from the very basic nature of a person or very basic nature of an animal, and then the conditioning, the conditions which are happening but have no connection with the natural stimuli. So there you have to, actually the dog's example is not very classic because it is not very common and not very difficult to apply to the situation of a distance learner. So B.F. Skinner's theory is more appropriately maybe implementable to the situation of a distance learner. So if you see when the dog hear the bell, you know that, and knows that there is something which is coming to me. Of course, that becomes a piece of attraction to the dog, but he or she will be uh, taking the reward only if it has natural stimuli, but which is not with the rat. So it is more perhaps appropriately linked with the distance learner because he or she might not have any that kind of temptation, previous stimuli to which they would like to integrate with the present situation. So altogether, a distance learner is in a cage, or as the rat is, and within that cage, he or she would like to find a way out. So perhaps this is my interpretation. That is how we talk much about in B.Ed courses, more often about the Skinner's operant conditioning theory, because that works much better with the distance learners. So if we look at the Watson's theory also, Watson's theory is also talks about the, unconditioned stimuli, unconditioned stimulus, and then if there is a situation where there is a stimulus but not linked with the innate nature or the classical nature or the operant conditioning nature, and if someone is giving some response in that situation, so that is Watson's learning theory, that it is not linked to any stimuli, but there is some reward, some law of frequency. It is more towards the practice thing. You do practice, you do frequent practice, eventually you hit upon some results, and then that result acts as a reinforcement to the distance learner. So it is also one good way of learning, because by
So
doing,
it is saying, so it is saying, so it is saying Watson learning theory is the expansion of Pavlov theory.
sorry,
It has been mentioned that Watson learning theory is the expansion of Pavlov theory.
no, but you see, that is the extension of Pavlov's theory, but it is not having the natural stimuli there. Unconditional hai. This is unconditional. So this is more by way of practice. If we look at the Pavlov's theory, then that has to be that is based on an natural stimuli. So if it is not natural stimuli, then that will not work. But Watson's theory, he drew from the theory, but if you look at what he says, it is uh, he also says that it is a substituting or substitution of one stimuli to another. So that way he takes departure from the natural stimuli, and perhaps the stimulus that comes from the sense of achievement through doing things more than once. So frequency of exercise is the core word. Frequency of exercise. It is there. I mean, some stimulus will be there, but it is not definitely that stimulus which is based on the innate nature of the distance learner. So there you have to distinguish the innate nature of the learner is the natural stimuli, but here the stimulus is basically from the from what I should say pleasure of learning from practice. So that will be there. So I think we have to see it in that perspective. There will be some stimuli, there will be, but it's not definitely the innate or the natural stimuli. It is the stimulus which which emanates from the pleasure of practice. You see, it is the frequency of practice. So the frequency of practice will definitely give some pleasure, some satisfaction. At that satisfaction, pleasure will act as a stimulus. So we will go to the maybe these are a couple of other theories are also there. Gagne's theory is there. Then this is also little more because the Gagne's theory is also practiced in some sense. We will look at it maybe little. So Gagne's theory is no, it is basically uh, analysis of learning processes and the design of instruction. So Gagne, what he distinguishes between the conditions which are internal and external. That is the primary focus of the Gagne's theory. Internal conditions are those are conditions which are motivations and recalling. For external conditions are those one which are behavioral. So it is basically distinguishing between the internal and external uh, conditions which are there. Like if we have some behavioral changes, we have the uh, stimulus that is coming from over a period of time. So or the behaviors changes in the behavior which are happening with the internal say for example when there are permanent changes. So if there is a permanent changes in the behavior of a person, then that means the learning has been quite effective. But if it is a change which happens due to motivation or recall or sort of recalling the, that means taking back the reinforcement. So then there are also changes. So for example, if we look at the example of the rat, if you don't put the grain in the cage after opening the liver, if there is no grain, the rat will eventually be discouraged to come to that point. So you have to see the Gagne's learning theory is basically uh, theory which goes into a different domain, and it takes into account the skills, because the rat will be oriented into gaining a sort of skill. With that skill, the rat will always hit the lever, particularly that lever which will open up for access to the grain. So that skill will be developed in a rat. But if you withdraw that reward or reinforcement, the rat will not go, will eventually will not go and hit the liver. So because the rat will know that there is no reinforcement. So if, in first phase there is a skill, there is an, you can say it ability which is built in terms of skill, but there is information in the beginning, eventually it changes into skill, or rather knowledge in terms of the distance education or distance learner. And if you continue with that skill, of course the learner will continue progressing in the study. But if you withdraw the reinforcement, then the skill will be withdrawn. So Gagne's basic ultimate aim is to show that if you continue with the external and internal motivation, then you can build skill in the distance learner. But at certain point of time, if you withdraw that reinforcement, then that will affect the motor skills. Motor skills, you know, what are the motor skills? Those are skills which are basically relating to the mind and the actions. So, for a distance learner, if you keep on reinforcing, there will be attitudinal difference, attitudinal development in the learner, and he or she will learn the motor skills. Just like rat has learned that skill. Similarly, in the driving is one such example. Of course, drawing, typing, and driving, but driving is more important skill, which is exhibited by the permanent, by the regular reinforcement. You will end up becoming a good driver only if you are continuously encouraged to drive. And how to continuously encourage to drive? By giving you some reinforcement, that maybe in terms of appreciation, maybe in terms of driving license, maybe in terms of certain social obligations that you are able to perform. But if that doesn't happen, then perhaps there could be withdrawal of the learning process. So, as we say, learning alphabets, learning subtraction, the rat is first attuned to move to the right point, then the hitting the lever, then taking the results or taking the grain, and afterwards it becomes more frequent. So the frequency will bring more better skills. So that is the, so it is a categories model. So that means there are different categories of achievement at a different level. So there is a verbal information that is similar to all. Then there are intellectual skills, cognitive skills, attitude, and motor skills. Means there's a gradual hierarchy. Initially, you throw some idea, put it into one's mind, that gets translated into skills. Then from skills, you get sensitivity to the act. Then you act. Then you use the logic, inductive and deductive. With logic, you explore more better results, and then there's a change in the attitude, and ultimately your mind and actions, they are integrated, and some permanency in the skill is achieved. Say, for example, driving and drawing, because in drawing you don't initially draw. You are given some information. You are told to draw lines. Then you are told to draw parallel lines. Then you are asked to draw rounds, circles. Then maybe the triangles and so forth. And then you continue with that, and ultimately you are able to draw. The same is with typing. You are given the basic structure A S D F G and so forth. Then you continue typing. Then your errors are rectified eventually. Same is with driving. So Gaggenage is a categories model of learning theory. So that means you learn gradually, end up in a more concrete learning. So I think it is time. So we will, discuss the cognitivist school of thought. So we understand what is cognitivism. We will discuss cognitivism, and then maybe information processing theory and so forth. I thought we would discuss Maslow's theory of hierarchy, hierarchical needs. We will discuss. So I think we will discuss the what is cognitivistic approach. We had the behavioristic approach, then the cognitivistic approach, then the constructivist approach. Uh, and lastly, yeah, the fourth one is constructivist school of thought or constructivist approach. So the cognitivist approach or the school of thought is believes that the learning which happens by understanding, motivation, and retention. There are three things. Initially, I said one thing that this is most subtle theory. This is most subtle school of thought. That means it is the most important in teaching learning process, because we understand by, say for example, by behavioristic school of thought, whereby there are certain behaviors that becomes permanent features of our life, but in doing so, there is a very sensitive understanding. There is a very sensitive gain of knowledge, which may not be physically or exhibited or explicit there in our persona, but it is there, specifically for our thoughts, emotions, and feelings. When we develop a certain set of attitude in our feelings towards certain situations, we react very differently. So what is this? These are mental exercises. Cognitive exercise is mental exercise. That is how it is related to understanding, motivation, and retention. So we have, so these theories actually these are associated with the continuity and repetition. What happens in our proximate environment that affects, may not be directly affecting, but indirectly it makes a lot of dent on our personality. And if somebody is doing some things repetitively, it affects us more than things which are happening more explicitly. Say, for example, your neighbor is doing something. If we do not like it and there's a repeated behavior like that, then we develop a very different and rigid set of attitude towards our neighbor. How do we develop that? Same is for the knowledge. If there is a continuity, there is a repetition of some information in the classroom, then perhaps we take it and retain it in our mind. We may not exhibit it immediately on paper or elsewhere, but it is retained and it becomes part of our thinking process. Sometimes आपने वर्ड सुना होगा कि भाई वो तो बस दिमाग से या तो अच्छा सोचता है या बुरा ही सोचता है। तो बुरा वो दिमाग से सोचता है, करता नहीं है। तो ये जो करना नहीं है, इट इज नॉट इन द डूइंग, बट इट इज इन द mind. So what is it in the mind? I think if we have to objectify it, which is very difficult to that way pinpoint or objectify it, but then it is always there in the attitude. If someone does not like some food, maybe also often you may make tempted to that, one would not be ready to accept it because of certain feelings that have been gathered there, and they are in the mind, and they are in the retention, or they are retained. So this is we use the word knowing. So this is related to the word knowing. What is the knowing? Knowing is to no, understanding. Knowing is understanding. It is not doing. Doing is different. Knowing is different. So the word knowing refers to the cognitivism. So if we know something, that means we understand. That means we are affected by it. So we are emotionally attached to it. And if we know it, that means we have retained it. To know is different, and to exhibit to deny is different. So if we are in the denial mode, then it is exhibition. But if we know and do not exhibit it, so that is the cognitivistic approach. So if you look at the teaching learning process, this is very important part of learning, because there are a lot of things which we do not actually work in our worldview, but yet we retain them inside. There's a very important piece of information, knowledge, which we keep within ourselves. We do not use it, but we keep it within ourselves. We retain it, and we are emotionally attached to it, and we understand it. May not be exactly exhibiting them and telling everybody that I understand it, I do not understand it. But then attitude is developed within ourselves, whereby I think the best way to describe the word stand. हम कभी कभी कह देते हैं कि this is my stand. What is my stand? My stand is nowhere to be seen. My stand is this, you do this. So this my stand is basically the cognitivistic learning. So cognitivistic learning के कुछ factors हैं. So the very first one is sensory register. Short-term memory, I think these are not very difficult to understand. Long-term memory and storage. Sensory register. So what happens? Our senses, what we see, what we smell, what we hear, what we taste. I think these are our sense organs. Skin. You see, nobody knows if we shake hand what feelings we get. But every individual gets some sort of feelings. And those feelings cannot be explained. But next time, if I, instead of shaking hand, I simply say namaskar, that brings changes in my attitude. Yes?
Sir, it has been written that this cognitive theory of learning lie in Gestalt psychology and the field theory of Kurt Lewin. So in organizational behavior, we have this Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin is there. चेंज थ्योरी का है सर कर्ट लिविंग का, तो इसमें अनफ्रीज चेंज एंड फ्रीजिंग इज देयर, so how it correlates with this?
No, can you repeat it?
So it has been written to historical roots of modern cognitive theory of learning lies in Gestalt psychology and field theory of Kurt Lewin.
Where it is?
Kurt Lewin का सर
अच्छा अच्छा हाँ
it is on page number
major historical
32.
theories of learning,
Yeah.
Gestalt psychology,
तो ये Kurt
and
Lewin
the field theory.
या कर्ट लिविंग का चेंज थ्योरी होता है सर, जो मुझे याद है, अनफ्रीज चेंज एंड फ्रीज. So how it is correlated with that?
It is with Gestalt theory.
Sir?
With whom it is to be related?
With cognitive theory.
हाँ, तो Gestalt psychology है ना, psychology. You see,
तो चेंज थ्योरी है कर्ट लिविंग का, राइट?
हाँ,
कर्ट
नहीं वो
लिविंग
तो
का
field
चेंज
theory,
थ्योरी इज देयर. इट इज
नहीं
फॉर
उनकी
फील्ड
theory
राइट
है.
सर. फील्ड
Gestalt theory क्या है? It's basically जो
थ्योरी ऑफ चेंज.
साइकोलॉजी जो है, दैट इज Gestalt साइकोलॉजिकल थ्योरी जो है, वो क्या कहती है? दैट इज द
दैट इज
टेकिंग
डिफरेंट.
है. हाँ, दैट इज डिफरेंट. बट
आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट कर्ट लिविंग.
हाँ, कॉट लिविंग्स थ्योरी ना, फील्ड थ्योरी.
या Field theory is there. It is about change. It is all
yes,
about change.
it is about change. That is what we are talking about. What I said, the word I use the word stand. Na?
More,
I
yeah.
use the stand, and I use right now. I said
Okay,
that
so
if I shake hand with something, na somebody,
uh-huh.
next time if I do not like the response,
Okay,
next time I will not shake hand. What I will do, I will put namaste.
okay.
So isn't there change?
So voice is breaking, sir.
No,
Not able to hear.
no. I said if I shake with somebody,
Yeah.
but I don't like the response of the somebody which is not visible. Are you getting my voice? I said that if I shake hand with someone, okay, okay, just a minute. Now are you getting my voice? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, Arti, I think there is something. So what I said is that if I shake hand with someone, Arti, are you getting my voice? But I don't like the feelings that I gather from the shaking hand. Okay. So next time I will not shake hand. I will escape shaking hand immediately and put namaste. Why is that? One, you said it is a field theory, and we are talking about the understanding emotions and retention, right? So it is not very explicit response. Nobody will understand what feelings I get by shaking hand with someone. That will be very, very personal to me. It will be understood by me only, right? It will be my emotion and motivation, and it will be my retention in the sense that I didn't like the feeling by shaking hands. Thereby, next time I will not shake hand, I will put namaste to escape from shaking hands. One point. What is the basics of field study? Actual experience. So my experience from this actual act of shaking hand is very, very personal to me, because it is a cognitive experience. It is a cognitivistic learning. So next time I will retain it in my mind because it is very, very personal and emotional to me. And next time I will avoid shaking hands, and immediately instead shaking hands I'll put namaste so that I am escaped from shaking hands. Is there some?
So is behavior में so is kind of behavior में will it be a short term kind of a situation में वो ऐसा act करेगा या फ्यूचर में भी इम्प्लीमेंट करेगा ऐसा बिहेवियर.
My idea is that it will be futurist, permanent,
Okay. Out of his or her experience, right?
very personal experience. Because I think you will agree, when we shake hand, we get lot of feelings, right? And if I modify my behavior next time, that means I have retained it. It is very difficult to change. You can change the behavior which is very explicit, but if it is very intimate, it is very personal, it is a cognitive learning. If it is a cognitive learning, because we are talking about learning, so this is primarily a cognitive learning. So cognitive learning is basically very personal, very emotional, and then it gets retained because it reaches your very basic nature and what I should use, mind and heart rather, I will say, because we say that we can forget things which are there through our mind, but if someone hurts you by heart, then we never forget. So it is that kind of learning. So it is primarily the input is received from the senses. I think it is confirmed with this statement. I told you the word skin. We learn a lot by touch or skin. So the shaking hand is learning by sensory organ, which is skin. So it can be short-term memory. It can be short-term also, but uh, sometimes if it is like that, say for example, I will give you another example. You sit in a bus, right? And there is a totally unknown person who sits next to you. And unintentionally, maybe her hand touches you, right? Or say, for example, conductor is giving ticket to you, and maybe there is a touch of hands. What happens? That is a short-term memory that remains for 7 to 10 seconds. You forget. Or if, say, for example, you are getting into bus has just started to move, someone jumps and someone, pulls you inside the bus. You don't remember that for a very long time. So it can be short time in that situation. But it can be long-term memory also, which is stored in the mind. It can be, but it depends upon the type of understanding and emotional experience you get from that cognitive learning. So it can be there for a very long period also. So I am very fond of Jean Piaget's view of cognitive development. This is one very interesting model which works on the schema. You use the word schema. So what is the word schema? I think all of you know. So what he says is that knowledge is stored in our mind in a hierarchical order. What is the hierarchical order? It is assimilation, accommodation, organization, equilibrium, and disequilibrium. So this is good. What happens? First of all, under this schema, or we can say the hierarchy of activity, hierarchy of order, whatever information we gather, first it gets assimilated into our base. Whatever you have, the prior knowledge. Then there is accommodation. Accommodation means a space is created. Say, for example, I learned how to use the knife, but I learned to use the knife only to cut the fruits, Next time I have to cut a hard nut. How to do that? So then my knowledge which has learned how to cut the fruit will leave space for knowing how to cut the hard fruits or the nuts. So that means there will be accommodation. Then organization, it will be automatically organized from simpler to complex, from easy to difficult, and then there will be balance, means uh, efficient working of the knowledge, how to work in different environments efficiently by on the basis of that knowledge, and then disequilibrium. So what is this equilibrium? This is very important. That is, it's a state of imbalance between assimilation and accommodation. Sometimes we get confused and we cut our finger. So Jean Piaget's theory of cognitivistic approach is based on the knowledge hierarchy. How do we learn and how do we use that learning? How do we retain that learning? And how sometimes things happen which are not as per the learning, but that is because of the imbalance, when it is maybe due to some due to some illness or due to some other reason. There might be some disturbance in our mind. Then there will be little disbalance or sort of situation whereby we will make a kind of confusion in. Sometimes we say there's a confusion in my mind. That is disequilibrium in our mind. So equilibrium and disequilibrium is the state when there's a total balance of information and we are using the information at right point in the right way. But disequilibrium situation is when we are using the information in inappropriate way, and we are ending up in some kind of accident or in some kind of result which is not favorable to us. So I think we will now conclude with this. So we will have a small look into the Bruner's theory. Perhaps we will do that tomorrow because it's already 1:10, and we have maybe a couple of other issues are there. Hierarchical needs, constructivistic school, the constructivistic approach is also there. We will discuss it tomorrow. So we will have a small review for 5 minutes if you people want. Can we have some discussion, maybe 2, 3, 2, 4, 5 minutes? Or just you would like to conclude?
So all clear from my end.
Okay, so we will discuss the last constructivistic approach or the school of thought. What is constructivism and the instructional design? How do we basically it is dealing with we will also discuss, I think, if I just forget, please, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is also very important model of learning, because we use it in our teachers training programs also. I think you are teachers trainer, so you will perhaps be a good resource person for that. And there are very long and very effective instructional implications of Maslow's view, because that is also hierarchical order in which the various needs works for the attainment or achievement or the fulfillment of education, the learning needs. So we'll discuss it tomorrow. So with this, I think we will take the session to end, to conclude. So today, I'm sure we had a basic idea as to what the learning is, what is the instruction, what is the definition of learning, what is the definition of instructions, and what are the various foundations of learning, and under which we behavioristic school of thought, and then the cognitivistic school of thought, and then which we discussed partially. So maybe the Maslow's issue we will discuss tomorrow. And then we will also discuss the constructivistic school of thought, or constructivism. What is constructivism and its implication to the instructional design. So with this, I conclude this session, and good day for all of you. So hope we'll meet tomorrow at the same time, that is 11.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, please, somebody. Yeah, RC is saying something. Okay, Ria.
Valda was saying thank you. I am also saying thank you.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
We'll meet you tomorrow then. Have a nice
Okay.
day.
Namaskar. Have a good day.